Millionaire enters an arranged marriage. Thinking his bride is ugly, what he discovers shocks him. Bright chandeliers cast glittering halos across the grand ballroom, where two families were gathered to seal a centuries-old tradition of arranged marriage. Among them stood Morgan Stanford, a young tech millionaire whose name graced the covers of business magazines around the world. Rumor had it he was forced into an old-fashioned union by the formidable matriarchs of two influential clans, and he was convinced his bride, whom he had never seen without a veil, was far from attractive. Little did Morgan know that behind the rumors, beyond the surface of tradition, lay a hidden truth that would unravel everything he thought he knew. Morgan Stanford wasn't the typical poster child for arranged marriages. 32 years old, confident and innovative, he had built Stanford Tech Solutions from a basement startup into a multi-million-dollar enterprise. Raised in Redwood Hills, Morgan had always prided himself on being progressive. He championed diversity in his company, supported modern ideas, and donated heavily to futuristic research initiatives. So, when his widowed mother, Elizabeth Stanford, revealed the family's ancient pact, with the Harrington clan one insisting on an arranged marriage, he found himself torn between obligation and disbelief. At first, Morgan tried to laugh it off. "This isn't the 1800s, he had said. But Elizabeth showed him documents dating back 200 years, forging an alliance between the Stanford and Harrington families, marked by a generational arrangement that was now due. His mother's frail health made it even harder to dismiss. The pact was not only an honor-bound tradition, but also carried historical weight that Elizabeth believed would bring good fortune to both families. Morgan felt coerced, especially when he found out that the Harrington family matriarch, Lady Rosamond Harrington, was equally adamant. Rumors hinted that the Harringtons had a granddaughter who had never been seen at public events, an heiress named Eloise Harrington. Word on the street was that Eloise was reclusive, possibly disfigured. Speculation fueled Morgan's reluctance. He was sure he was about to marry someone he would never have chosen under normal circumstances, someone, he presumed, unappealing by conventional standards. Despite his progressive stance, Morgan's vanity reared its head. He'd dated models and socialites women who turned heads at black-tie galas. An arranged marriage to a cloistered heiress felt archaic and humiliating, but Elizabeth's pale face and trembling hands appealed to his conscience. She insisted this was the best path for the family. With a heavy heart and a swirl of resentment, Morgan agreed to honor the age-old contract. The announcement of the engagement took high society by storm. Morgan's closest friends, including private equity mogul Jonathan Thorne, texted him non-stop. Some asked if he had lost a bet. Others teased him about taking one for the team. The tabloids, always hungry for a twist, buzzed about the mysterious Harrington granddaughter. Why had she never been photographed? Was she truly ugly, or was that simply malicious gossip? Beneath the jokes and jabs, Morgan seethed at the idea that his personal life was reduced to public spectacle. Even if he found the entire situation preposterous, he wasn't heartless. A lingering guilt nibbled at his conscience. If Eloise was painfully shy or had reasons for avoiding the spotlight, how cruel was it for him to assume the worst? Yet every fiber of his ego pushed him to believe he was being shackled to an unappealing, unremarkable bride. His mother's health wavered, adding urgency. Confined mostly to her estate, Elizabeth was comforted by the prospect of Morgan fulfilling the family duty before her time was up. "You'll find a way to love her," Elizabeth whispered one evening, her eyes watery from medication. And, if not love, at least respect. The Harringtons have been allies to our family for generations. In Redwood Hills, the old money circle was abuzz. The Harrington name carried weight, especially in philanthropic circles. Lady Rosamond Harrington was known for her unwavering commitment to tradition and for her lavish philanthropic balls. She had hosted the Redwood Opera Gala for decades, ensuring the Harrington brand stayed relevant. Yet it was well known that the Harrington fortune had diminished somewhat over time. Some speculated that this arranged marriage was also a way to secure a beneficial alliance, Morgan's financial empire propping up the Harrington legacy. Morgan's days blurred. He tried to push forward with his business ventures, but found himself distracted by wedding arrangements and a curiosity about Eloise. He sent discreet inquiries to acquaintances, but details about her were frustratingly scarce. She had apparently studied abroad, had top-level education, but never appeared in society pages. If pictures existed, they were locked away in private albums. With each passing day, Morgan felt his resentment mix with unease. What if Eloise was not only shy, but also unhappy about marrying him? Would they spend their lives in an empty arrangement, just to appease tradition and familial honor? The irony weighed heavy, the forward-thinking tycoon trapped in an age-old custom. The date for the official betrothal ceremony arrived. Typically, the two families would gather at the Harrington ancestral estate, perched on a hill overlooking Redwood Lake, to sign documents and observe centuries-old rituals. Morgan arrived in a sleek black limousine, his reflection in the tinted window revealing a tense jawline and troubled eyes. Stepping into the foyer of Harrington Manor felt like entering another era. Gilded mirrors, antique tapestries, and an air of hushed opulence greeted him. Lady Rosamond, poised and elegant, despite her advanced years, welcomed Morgan with a measured smile. Her steel-grey hair was swept up in a bun, and she wore pearls that likely belonged to her grandmother. "Welcome, Mr. Stanford. We are honored," she said, her voice smooth as velvet, but carrying a hint of authority. Morgan nodded politely, scanning the room. Servants moved discreetly, carrying trays of tea and pastries. The fragrance of lavender drifted from the arrangements that lined the hall. He noticed no sign of Eloise. That only heightened his apprehension. Finally, Rosamond led him to the study. There, seated on a Victorian love-seat, was a figure in a demure ivory dress, face partially concealed by a delicate lace veil. Her posture was remarkably straight, her hands folded in her lap. Morgan's pulse quickened. This was Eloise, the woman he was fated to marry. A hush fell as Morgan approached. He offered a stiff bow, uncertain of the expected protocol. She inclined her head in acknowledgement. Lady Rosamond cleared her throat. "Eloise, my dear, this is Morgan Stanford." Eloise stood, revealing a graceful silhouette. Though her face remained obscured, Morgan glimpsed large, luminous eyes. The rest of her features were hidden behind the veil's intricate lace. When she spoke, her voice was soft but assured. "It is a pleasure to finally meet you, Mr. Stanford." Morgan felt his heart thump. He had expected someone timid or awkward. Instead, she exuded a quiet confidence. Still, the veil hovered between them, feeding his curiosity and frustration. Why hide her face even now? Was she disfigured or scarred or perhaps worried about his reaction? Their brief conversation was stilted, overshadowed by Lady Rosamond's presence. They exchanged polite remarks about the weather, about Redwood Hills. No mention was made of Eloise's veil, as if it were the most natural thing in the world to conceal herself. Morgan noted how eloquently she spoke, picking her words carefully. He also noted her gloved hands. Her entire being seemed swathed in a protective layer. Then came the moment to sign the preliminary betrothal agreement. A lawyer, Robert Nottingham, produced a sheaf of documents. Morgan's stomach lurched. He felt like he was signing his life away. But one glance at his mother, pale and hopeful by his side, softened his resolve. He scrawled his signature with a flourish. Eloise did the same, her veil shifting slightly with each pen stroke, never revealing her full face. In the weeks that followed, Morgan found himself in an odd whirlwind of wedding preparations. He managed to secure a few meetings with Eloise, always in the presence of chaperones, primarily her sharp-eyed grandmother. On each occasion, Eloise wore an exquisite gown and matching veil. Her outfits were always tasteful, but never once did she show her face. She spoke calmly, with a poise that hinted at strong education and refined tastes. She mentioned authors she admired: Jane Austen, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Toni Morrison, and demonstrated an unexpected depth that caught Morgan off guard. Surprisingly, there were moments when Morgan found himself enjoying her company. She was soft-spoken yet unafraid to express thoughtful opinions. At one tea gathering, they debated the merits of philanthropic endeavors. He argued for investing in innovative startups that addressed global issues, while she believed in grassroots activism to empower local communities. Their viewpoints clashed, but the conversation sparked an energy that Morgan rarely experienced, even among his business colleagues. Despite these intellectual sparks, one question continually plagued him: why hide her face? With the wedding date looming, he felt the pressure to at least confirm the rumors, or see if he could glean any hint of a secret disfigurement. During a rare moment alone, he gently asked, "Eloise, may I know why you choose to wear the veil, even in our private meetings?" She stiffened slightly, then responded with unhurried composure, "It is a matter of tradition, Mr. Stanford. My grandmother insists that, according to our family's custom, the bride remains veiled until the wedding day. I'm sorry if it causes you discomfort." Morgan realized that this was likely Lady Rosamond's mandate, yet part of him wondered if Eloise agreed with it or felt forced. His frustration swelled, but her polite finality discouraged further probing. Friends and acquaintances offered unsolicited opinions. Jonathan Thorne teased him mercilessly. "Maybe she's a vampire," he joked at a private gathering. Morgan rolled his eyes, but his thoughts circled back to Eloise's hidden face. She might not be physically monstrous, but the secrecy was driving him mad. One late evening, he confided in his mother. Elizabeth, weak but ever wise, took his hand. "Son, if you truly want to know who Eloise is, look beyond the veil. The face is merely a reflection of the soul." Morgan found little comfort in that cryptic advice, yet it planted a seed of curiosity to dig deeper into Eloise's character rather than her appearance. Amid the swirl of preparations, an unexpected ally emerged. Maggie Harrington, Eloise's cousin, took it upon herself to discreetly befriend Morgan. Maggie was a vivacious woman with freckles and a quick smile, quite the opposite of Eloise's reserved demeanor. She found a chance to speak with Morgan at a small family brunch and seemed delighted to gossip, albeit kindly. "So, you're the famous Morgan Stanford. I hear you're worried about my cousin's veil," she said lightly, swirling a flute of orange juice. Morgan, caught off guard, swallowed nervously. "I just find it unusual that she's so determined to hide her face. I'm sure it's not my place to question your family's customs, but I'm curious." Maggie's gaze sparkled. "She's under grandmother's thumb, you know. She's actually quite lovely, but grandmother is extremely strict about that old custom. And Eloise has her own reasons for not pushing back." Morgan leaned in, eyebrows raised. "Reasons? So, it's not just about tradition." Maggie hesitated before continuing. "Let's just say Eloise is dealing with personal matters. Don't assume it's about looks. She's fiercely intelligent and has her own beliefs. There's more to her story than meets the eye." That conversation left Morgan both intrigued and uneasy. He pressed Maggie further, but she politely changed the subject, leaving him with only a morsel of insight. If Eloise wasn't wearing the veil due to disfigurement, then what was it? As the days flew by, the wedding preparations accelerated. Morgan's business schedule overlapped with fittings, guest list reviews, menu tastings, and endless calls from event planners. Despite his initial reluctance, he He found himself swept up in the momentum. He recognized a flicker of anticipation, wondering what would happen when he finally saw Eloise face to face, unveiled, free from speculation. He was almost ashamed to admit he looked forward to that moment, if only to quell the swirling rumors. Yet, in quiet moments, doubt gnawed at him. He was making a lifelong commitment to someone he hardly knew. Even with arranged marriages, one typically had more clarity. Was he tumbling into a trap? Or perhaps this union would open doors he never knew existed. As per tradition, it was agreed that Eloise would move into the Stanford family mansion immediately after the wedding. Elizabeth insisted that once Morgan and Eloise said their vows, they should start their life under the same roof. The Stanford mansion was a stately home of marble corridors and manicured gardens. Morgan had grown up there, and the place carried deep emotional significance. However, its silent halls had become a somber reminder of the father he'd lost, and the mother whose health waned. For the time being, Elizabeth resided in a tranquil wing reserved for her rest and medical supervision. Nurses and caretakers bustled about discreetly, ensuring she was comfortable. She spoke often of her excitement to witness Morgan's wedding before her condition worsened. "This house needs the sound of laughter again," she murmured one afternoon. "I hope Eloise's presence will bring that." Morgan couldn't help but notice the subtext. His mother was betting on Eloise to be not just a bride, but a source of rejuvenation. The weight of expectations pressed on him, feeding a strange sense of responsibility toward his future wife's happiness. In the final weeks before the ceremony, Morgan tried to schedule private conversations with Eloise outside the Harrington estate, but each request was politely turned down. Lady Rosamond insisted that all interactions adhere to strict decorum. Morgan felt stifled. How could he truly get to know this woman if every moment was orchestrated under watchful eyes? His frustration boiled over one evening. He locked himself in his study, ignoring calls, and paced the floor. Arranged marriage or not, he had the right to speak to the woman who would become his partner. But every family tradition was stacked against him. Part of him suspected that the more certain people stifled Eloise's freedom, the more determined she was to remain hidden. Was that her own silent rebellion? At night, he found himself restless. His mind conjured images of Eloise, her poised posture, her gentle voice, the swirl of lace around her face, and her mysterious eyes. Sometimes he thought he glimpsed sadness, other times a flicker of daring. With each fleeting memory, the question returned, who was Eloise Harrington beneath the veil? The day before the wedding arrived, bringing with it a sense of controlled chaos. The Harrington Manor and the Stanford Mansion were abuzz with florists, caterers, decorators, and security teams. Redwood Hill's social elite received their invitations cream-colored envelopes with gold, embossing that signaled a union of two historic families. The rumors about the veiled bride soared to fever pitch, and the city's gossip columns thrived on speculation. That night, Morgan stood on the balcony of his family mansion, staring at the moonlit gardens. He felt the oppressive weight of the next day. His life was about to merge with a stranger's, someone he couldn't fully picture. He wondered if Eloise felt the same turmoil. Just then, his phone buzzed. It was Maggie Harrington. Surprised, Morgan picked up. "You're not supposed to call me at this hour," he joked half-heartedly. Maggie's voice was low. "I just wanted to tell you something important. I can't go into detail, but please, don't judge Eloise by the veil. Her circumstances are not what you think. She's not hiding because she's ugly or scarred. There are family expectations, yes, but also personal reasons she can't disclose yet." Morgan's heart pounded. "What reasons? Maggie, tell me something concrete." Maggie inhaled softly. "After the wedding, you'll see. Just please, treat her gently." Before he could probe further, she ended the call. Morgan felt a mix of relief and frustration. He was grateful someone was looking out for Eloise, but the secrecy was maddening. Still, he found unexpected comfort in Maggie's words. Eloise might not fit the grim rumors. Perhaps behind the lace was a person he could care for or even love. His thoughts swirled as he tried to sleep, dreams morphing between lace-veiled faces and the looming sense of family duty. Tomorrow, everything would change. Morning arrived in a swirl of festivities. The wedding ceremony was set to take place in the Harringtons' private chapel, a centuries-old building with stained glass windows that filtered sunlight into dazzling rainbows. Rows of pews were adorned with white roses and delicate ribbons. High society figures, business magnates, and philanthropic leaders took their seats, buzzing with anticipation. Morgan, dressed in a custom-fitted suit, stood at the altar. His palms felt clammy as the organ music rose. He glanced at the throng of people, his mother in the front row, looking frail but beaming, Jonathan Thorne smirking from a few rows back, and Lady Rosamond Harrington with an expression of regal pride. Next to her stood Maggie, who offered Morgan a subtle, encouraging nod. Then the doors opened. Eloise emerged, dressed in a wedding gown of antique ivory lace. The gown, intricately embroidered, clung to her figure elegantly, and the train swept behind her. She wore the fateful veil, which obscured her face entirely. Morgan's breath caught. Despite his frustration, he couldn't deny the striking vision. She floated down the aisle, escorted by a family retainer in place of her deceased parents. Each step echoed in the silent chapel. Morgan sensed the weight of 100 gazes. At last, Eloise reached his side. The officiant began the formalities. Vows were exchanged in subdued voices. Morgan promised devotion in sickness and health, for better or worse. Eloise recited her own vows with a calm, steady tone that belied any fear. With each spoken word, Morgan felt an unspoken bond tightening around them, both a promise and a tether. The moment to unveil the bride arrived, an anticipated tradition in any wedding, but now carrying extraordinary suspense. The officiant gently intoned, "You may lift the veil and kiss your bride." A hush fell over the guests. Morgan's hand trembled as he reached for the delicate lace, heart pounding so loudly he was sure everyone could hear. His fingers lifted it slowly, revealing a cascade of silky black hair pinned in an elegant updo. Then he saw her face. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Eloise Harrington was undeniably beautiful, soft, refined features, warm brown eyes, and skin glowing with nervous excitement. There was no scar, no deformity, nothing to match the rumors of ugliness. Morgan felt a dizzying wave of relief and astonishment. She wasn't just attractive, she was radiant. Their eyes locked. For a moment, he thought he glimpsed vulnerability in her gaze. Then, following tradition, he leaned in to place a gentle kiss on her lips. It was brief, tinged with uncertainty, but in that fleeting moment, something electric passed between them. The chapel erupted in applause. Morgan and Eloise turned to face the guests as husband and wife, the hush replaced by triumphant organ music. Among the cheering, Morgan caught sight of Maggie's knowing grin. She mouthed, "Told you." He felt heat rise to his cheeks, both from the intensity of the moment and the realization of how wrong he'd been in his assumptions. The reception was held in the Harrington Manor's grand ballroom. Guests feasted on gourmet dishes, lobster, bisque, rack of lamb, and exotic pastries. Music from a live quartet drifted through the gilded hall. Morgan and Eloise circulated among the well-wishers, receiving congratulations and polite curiosity. People gushed over the bride's beauty, taking note of the irony that her face had been hidden from public view for so long. At one point, Morgan managed to draw Eloise aside. They slipped onto the manor's terrace, a quiet spot overlooking the gardens. The air smelled of roses and freshly cut grass. He touched her hand gently. "Eloise, I owe you an apology," he began, struggling to find the right words. I believed those rumors. I expected you to be someone entirely different. She studied his face, her expression cautious. It's understandable. I know what people say. Grandmother insisted on keeping me out of the public eye. She believes in certain traditions to a fault. And I complied because it felt easier than fighting her. Morgan's chest tightened. But why now? We're married. You can be free to live as you choose. Eloise looked away, eyes shadowed with an emotion he couldn't name. It's more complicated. There are responsibilities, family matters. You'll learn about them soon enough. He wanted to press her, to demand clarity, but the moment was shattered by the master of ceremonies calling them back for the first dance. With a resigned sigh, he offered her his arm. She accepted, and together they stepped back into the throng of well-dressed onlookers. As the music swelled, Morgan held his new bride close. The warmth of her body, the scent of her perfume, it all felt surreal. His heart thumped with excitement and confusion. Only hours earlier, he had braced himself to marry someone he believed to be unsightly. Now, he cradled a woman of undeniable grace, who carried secrets far more intriguing than any rumor. As the reception wound down, the final wave of guests departed. Lady Rosamond gave Morgan a curt nod, congratulating him on his good behavior. Eloise, flanked by maids, disappeared briefly to change from her gown. Morgan watched the swirl of staff clearing tables and recognized that his life had turned a corner. He was now a husband, legally and ceremonially bound to a woman he knew so little about, yet found himself inexorably drawn to. He and Eloise were to spend the night at the Harrington estate before moving to the Stanford mansion the next day. Their bridal suite was a lavishly furnished set of rooms in a private wing, tall windows draped in brocade, antique furnishings, and a bed canopied in gauzy fabric. Morgan entered the suite with trepidation, uncertain how Eloise felt about the consummation of their marriage. He found her standing by a mirrored vanity, now free of the lace veil. Her hair was unbound, falling in waves around her shoulders. The candlelight illuminated her features, revealing a flicker of anxiety in her eyes. He approached slowly, offering a reassuring smile. "I know this is all sudden. We don't have to rush anything," he said softly. Eloise's cheeks flushed. She looked at her reflection rather than at him. "Thank you," she murmured. "Everything changed so quickly. I'm still trying to understand my place in all this." Morgan placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "We're in this together. I want to respect your boundaries. If you need time, just say so." She exhaled, relief evident. "I appreciate that." The tension eased as they navigated their first hours of married life. They spoke quietly about mundane details, how the day's events had gone, who had the best reaction in the crowd, how the music soared. The conversation remained polite and guarded, but Morgan sensed a foundation of mutual respect forming. Eventually, they decided to retire for the night. With an unspoken agreement, Morgan ended up sleeping on a chaise longue by the window. Eloise settled in the bed, separated by a respectful distance that felt both necessary and oddly comforting. Lying awake, Morgan stared at the moonlit ceiling, mind racing. He had seen her face, felt her warmth, and heard the sincerity in her voice. She wasn't the monstrous figure he'd conjured in his imagination, yet she was bound by something he still didn't fully grasp. Tomorrow, they would move to his family home, and with each passing day, he intended to learn more about the woman behind the veil and the secrets she carried. The next afternoon, Morgan and Eloise departed Harrington Manor for the Stanford estate. The newlyweds rode in a vintage car that Lady Rosamond insisted upon, a final nod to her traditional flair. As they traversed the winding roads, Eloise gazed at the passing scenery, silent yet seemingly contemplative. Morgan wanted to ask her countless questions, but sensed she wasn't ready to bare her soul in front of the driver and staff. Upon arrival, A small group of household staff stood in the courtyard to welcome them. Elizabeth, pale but smiling radiantly, waited in a wheelchair near the grand entrance. When Morgan helped Eloise out of the car, his mother's face lit with approval. "You look lovely, my dear," she said, beckoning Eloise closer. "This house is your home now." Eloise kneeled beside Elizabeth's wheelchair, placing a gentle hand over Elizabeth's frail fingers. "Thank you. I will strive to honor the Stanford name," she whispered. Elizabeth's eyes glistened with tears. Morgan felt a pang of gratitude that Eloise showed such empathy toward his mother. Over the next hours, Eloise was introduced to the estate staff, shown the library, the gardens, and the wing that would serve as their private quarters. Morgan was struck by how quickly she adapted, offering polite remarks and charming curiosity. The staff was equally enchanted. Rumors spread that the quiet, hidden Harrington bride was far kinder and more poised than anyone expected. Yet beneath her courteous exterior, Morgan caught glimpses of tension. Her posture would stiffen if certain questions arose. And whenever the subject of the Harrington family tradition was broached, a flash of unease crossed her expression. He recalled Maggie's cryptic hints and vowed to approach the matter gently. That evening, after settling Eloise into the mansion, Morgan walked with her through the gardens. It was twilight, and lanterns cast a soft glow over manicured hedges and blooming rose bushes. Fireflies flickered in the distance. He mustered courage to ask what had haunted him for weeks. "Eloise, one understand there are family customs that kept you hidden, but we're married now. You can tell me if something is wrong or if you need help." She paused, fingers brushing a bloom of lavender. "It's not something I can explain easily. My grandmother is extremely protective of our family image. There are business interests, old debts, and other obligations at play. The veil was part of a vow, a literal promise to remain unseen until I was wed. Breaking it could have meant severe consequences for me and my inheritance." Morgan furrowed his brow. "Consequences from Rosamond?" Eloise gave a slight nod. "She's not cruel, but she's rigid about tradition. Now that we're married, the vow is fulfilled, and I can exist more freely. But I still worry about what else might be uncovered. My parents' deaths left certain legal matters unresolved." A swirl of questions danced in Morgan's mind, but he chose to tread lightly. "Thank you for telling me. I won't pry further right now, but if ever you need me, I'm here." The gratitude in Eloise's gaze spoke volumes. They walked the rest of the way in comfortable silence, two strangers bound by marriage, slowly forging a pathway to understanding. Adjusting to married life was a delicate dance. Morgan had grown used to solitude or the casual relationships he'd cultivated while climbing the corporate ladder. Now, he found himself sharing breakfast and dinner with Eloise, discussing the day's events, learning each other's preferences. He discovered that she adored Earl Grey tea with just a hint of milk, that she rose before dawn to read or write in a leather-bound journal, and that classical piano music soothed her nerves. Eloise also began exploring the Stanford Estate's library. One afternoon, Morgan found her perched on a window seat, engrossed in a tome about Redwood Hill's local history. She looked up, eyes bright with curiosity. "Your ancestors contributed to the city's development, financing schools and building hospitals." Morgan smiled. "Yes, my grandfather was big on civic duty. It's a legacy I try to continue. Our foundation supports tech education in underprivileged neighborhoods." Her face lit with interest. "That's wonderful. Philanthropy has always appealed to me, though grandmother mostly restricts her charitable efforts to society galas." He sensed a kinship forming over shared ideals. Perhaps, he thought, they could channel their combined resources for greater good. The notion excited him more than any boardroom deal ever had. But just when the days seemed to settle into a promising routine, a challenge arose. Elizabeth's health took a sudden downturn. She was rushed to the hospital one night, leaving the household in turmoil. Doctors stabilized her, but the prognosis was shaky. Morgan felt a knot of fear tighten in his chest. He couldn't imagine losing his mother at this juncture. Throughout the ordeal, Eloise remained steadfast. She insisted on accompanying Morgan to the hospital, comforting him in waiting rooms, speaking calmly to doctors. Her composure under stress both amazed and reassured him. "Your mother is strong," she told him softly. "We must keep faith." Late one evening, as Elizabeth dozed off in her hospital bed, Morgan found himself standing in the hallway with Eloise. Emotions overwhelmed him: grief, exhaustion, and gratitude for his bride's unwavering support. Almost without thinking, he reached for her hand. "Thank you," he whispered, voice taut with emotion. She squeezed his hand gently. "We're partners now. This is what we do for each other." In that moment, Morgan felt a shift. His preconceptions and prejudices about her were falling away, replaced by genuine admiration. The veil that had loomed so large in his mind now seemed trivial next to her empathy and strength. Morgan returned late from the hospital on a balmy evening, shoulders slumped with fatigue. His mother's condition was stable, but her future remained uncertain. He found Eloise in the study, poring over some documents. She looked up with concern. "How is she?" "Same," Morgan murmured. "She's sleeping. The doctors aren't sure what the next few days will bring." Eloise stood, crossing the room to offer him a quiet embrace. He sagged into her arms, breathing in the lavender scent of her hair. Their closeness felt surprisingly natural, but as his eyes drifted over the documents spread across the desk, he noticed the Harrington family crest. Curiosity flared. "Are you working on something from your family estate?" he asked, nodding to the papers. Eloise hesitated, then nodded. "A matter of inheritance. Grandmother requires me to finalize some financial transfers now that I'm married. She's insisting I keep certain assets in the Harrington name." Morgan frowned. "Assets you can't share with me?" She looked torn. "That's the gist. But I'm not sure if it's something I want. I want transparency between us, but my grandmother," Morgan held her gaze. "We're a team. If there's something you need to keep separate, I understand. But if it's something forced upon you, we'll figure out how to stand up against her." A soft smile crept onto Eloise's lips. "Thank you. I've never had anyone side with me against grandmother before. I appreciate it more than you know." In that moment, Morgan glimpsed the weight Eloise carried. She was not merely the hidden heiress. She was a woman caught in a web of obligations, trying to forge her own path. He didn't press further, sensing that her trust needed to grow naturally. That night, as he tried to sleep, he wondered if Lady Rosamond's controlling grip extended beyond tradition. Could the old matriarch be using Eloise's inheritance for her own ends? The question hovered like a spectre, fueling Morgan's protective instincts. In the weeks that followed, Elizabeth's health thankfully improved. She returned home under strict instructions for rest, regaining enough strength to engage in short conversations. Seeing his mother stable lifted a burden from Morgan's heart. Eloise, meanwhile, seamlessly stepped into a caring role, reading aloud to Elizabeth, arranging fresh flowers in her room, offering gentle companionship without overstepping. Morgan watched these gestures with a sense of wonder. He recalled how he had once assumed Eloise would be a burden, an awkward companion forced on him by archaic tradition. Instead, she brought grace and warmth to the household, filling corners of the mansion that had long felt empty. During stolen moments, they chatted over tea or walked in the gardens. They began to discover shared tastes, a love for classical music, a fascination with old architecture, and an appreciation for Redwood Hill's natural beauty. Eloise confessed she dreamed of turning one of the unused wings of the Harrington Manor into an art school for underprivileged children. Morgan shared his hope of expanding his foundation's reach beyond tech scholarships, perhaps into sustainable farming or green energy initiatives. Their bond was tested further when a minor crisis erupted at Stanford Tech Solutions. A security breach threatened some client data, and Morgan had to juggle damage control alongside family responsibilities. Eloise, though not a tech expert, provided emotional support and offered insight on managing public relations. She'd studied communications in college, a fact she rarely mentioned. Her suggestions proved invaluable, helping Morgan craft a sincere apology and transparent plan for addressing the breach. By the time the crisis subsided, Morgan realized how much he'd come to rely on her. Eloise was no mere ornament. She was a partner in every sense of the word, capable, intelligent, and caring. Despite their growing closeness, a persistent tension loomed. Lady Rosamond Harrington, the matriarch, remained a formidable figure, summoning Eloise to the Harrington Manor at intervals, demanding updates on her new life, and micromanaging the financial aspects of Eloise's inheritance. One afternoon, Eloise returned from a particularly tense meeting, her eyes reddened and posture stiff. Morgan found her in the library, fiddling with the spines of books as though searching for solace. He approached, concern evident. "What happened?" Eloise set her jaw. "Grandmother wants me to sign over a large portion of my inheritance into a trust she controls. She says it's for the family's legacy, but I feel it's more about her holding on to power. When I hesitated, she accused me of letting you influence me, of turning against her." Morgan felt a surge of protectiveness. "And what do you want to do with your inheritance?" she sighed. "Use it for good, perhaps set up that art school or invest in philanthropic causes with you. Grandmother sees it as a betrayal. She believes the Harrington name should remain separated from the Stanford interests." An anger stirred in Morgan. "We're married. We're meant to support each other's goals. She can't keep controlling you like this." Eloise's eyes brimmed with gratitude and fear. "I know, but I'm torn. Grandmother did raise me after my parents died. I owe her my respect. Yet, I no longer want to be her pawn, not after seeing how fulfilling it is to pursue genuine partnerships." Morgan reached out and clasped her hands. "You have a choice now, Eloise. You don't have to let her manipulate you." She nodded, though uncertainty clouded her gaze. "I want to believe that, but defying her outright, I'm afraid of what she might do." A steely determination settled in Morgan's chest. He had once scoffed at the idea of this marriage. Now, he was prepared to protect Eloise from the oppressive traditions that threatened her autonomy. "Then we'll stand together. She can't bully both of us." Tensions with Lady Rosamond escalated further. Over dinner one night, Eloise revealed that her grandmother had threatened to cut her off socially, forbidding any further association with Harrington events if she didn't comply with the trust transfer. Morgan was incensed, but Eloise seemed more saddened than angry. That same evening, the weather turned stormy. Rain lashed the windows, and thunder rumbled across the estate. Morgan and Eloise were in his study, the fire casting dancing shadows on the walls, when Eloise found her voice trembling with an admission she'd held back. "Morgan, there's something else I need to tell you," she began, eyes fixed on the flickering flames. "My parents didn't die in an accident, as widely reported. The truth is, my father took his own life, and my mother followed soon after from heartbreak and despair. Their finances had collapsed, and my father feared disgrace. Grandmother hushed it all up. She controlled the narrative, told the world it was a tragic car accident. She even arranged private coroners and hush money." Morgan swallowed, stunned. "I had no idea." Eloise's voice wavered. "She forced me to promise silence, to maintain the family's honorable reputation. That was another reason I lived in seclusion. She didn't want me speaking out." The veil was literal and metaphorical. He reached for her, heart aching at her confession. "Eloise, I'm so sorry." Her eyes brimmed with tears, but she held them back. "I hate living in shadows." Now that we're together, I want to be free. But grandmother's threats make it hard. She has so much influence, so many secrets. I don't want to lose what little I have left of my family, even if it's suffocating. Morgan gently cupped her cheek. You're not alone anymore. We'll face her together. A tear slipped down her face, and she leaned into his touch. In that moment, the weight of her secrets bound them closer than ever. The marriage that had begun as a forced arrangement was transforming into a bond forged by shared adversity and mutual understanding. For the first time, Morgan fully grasped the depth of Eloise's pain, and he became even more determined to stand by her side. Lady Rosamond's meddling reached a crescendo when she unexpectedly arrived at the Stanford mansion one afternoon, unannounced. The staff, taken aback, hurried to inform Morgan and Eloise. Rosamond strode into the main hall, regal yet severe, her cold eyes raked over the opulent decor, a sneer curling her lips. Morgan met her at the foot of the grand staircase. "Lady Rosamond," he said, voice carefully polite, "I wish we'd known you were coming. We would have prepared for your visit." She lifted her chin. "I am not here for pleasantries, Mr. Stanford. I need to speak with my granddaughter immediately." In private, Eloise appeared behind Morgan, hands clasped. "Grandmother, what is this about?" Rosamond turned sharply. "You will sign the trust documents I sent over. Now, I refuse to let you tarnish our family name by diluting our legacy with this. Trifling foundation nonsense. The Harrington fortune remains ours, or you suffer the consequences." Morgan bristled. "With all due respect, Lady Rosamond, Eloise is my wife. She has a say in how her inheritance is used." Rosamond's gaze was frosty. "I anticipated your meddling, Mr. Stanford, but I never imagined you'd blind her so thoroughly with your philanthropic charade. Eloise, if you do not sign, consider yourself disowned from the family, from our social circles, from everything we built." Eloise's face paled, her eyes flicking to Morgan. He stepped forward, anger tightening his throat. "You can't threaten her like that." Rosamond raised a hand dismissively. "I can, and I will. I didn't raise her to become a Stanford puppet." Trembling, Eloise found her voice. "I am not a puppet. I'm your granddaughter, and I've tried to honor our family. But I won't be blackmailed anymore." A tense silence stretched. Rosamond seemed momentarily taken aback by Eloise's defiance. Then, with an imperious tilt of her head, she hissed, "So be it. You've made your choice." She swept from the mansion, leaving a pall of dread in her wake. Eloise sank onto the nearest chair, tears threatening. Morgan knelt beside her, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "We'll get through this, I promise." Eloise swallowed hard. "You don't know what she's capable of, Morgan. She orchestrated lies about my parents' death. She controls so many powerful friends. She could ruin our reputations, sabotage your business." Morgan straightened. "Let her try. We'll fight back with truth, if we have to. The days of her veils and secrets are over." True to her threats, Lady Rosamond launched a campaign to isolate Eloise socially. Prestigious invitations once extended to Eloise disappeared. Harrington family members stopped calling. Certain boards and committees she had been slated to join mysteriously withdrew their offers. Even the Redwood Opera Gala, an event the Harringtons sponsored annually, sent a curt note suggesting Eloise need not attend. Morgan's business connections felt ripples too. A couple of high-profile investors pulled out of new ventures, citing lack of trust in the direction of Stanford Tech Solutions. Though the reasons were vague, Morgan suspected Rosamond's influence behind the scenes. At first, Eloise was distraught, blaming herself. She paced the halls, distressed at the thought of tarnishing the Stanford name, but Morgan reassured her they would manage the fallout. "My firm is stronger than a few fickle investors," he insisted. "And as for the social circuit, I'd rather stand by you in integrity than kowtow to their petty games. Word quietly spread that Eloise Harrington Stanford was no longer under her grandmother's thumb. Some philanthropic circles, especially the more progressive ones, applauded her stance. She began receiving discreet invitations from organizations that valued genuine giving over grand displays of tradition. Encouraged, Morgan and Eloise moved forward with their philanthropic plans. They allocated a portion of Eloise's inheritance, what she legally controlled, into a new foundation named the Harrington Stanford Initiative, aimed at supporting arts education, mental health awareness, and technological empowerment. By shining light on these issues, particularly mental health, Eloise hoped to honor her parents' memory, giving help to those who felt hopeless. During a press event to announce the new foundation, Eloise stood at the podium, heart-pounding. Morgan watched from the side, silently cheering her on. Cameras flashed. Journalists who once maligned her veil were now eager for a scoop. Eloise took a breath and spoke. "We live in a time where tradition and progress must converge. I believe we can respect our past without being shackled by it. My husband and I, we choose to use our resources for the betterment of others. This foundation is just the beginning." The applause was hesitant, then grew. In that moment, Eloise felt a surge of confidence. She was done hiding behind veils, literal or figurative. Morgan's chest swelled with pride, watching her emerge from the shadows. While Lady Rosamond raged in private, events began to turn in Eloise's favor. Public sentiment shifted. Newspapers ran flattering articles praising her initiative. Society columns that once feasted on rumors about her looks now lauded her charitable endeavors. An influential Redwood Hills philanthropist, Beatrice Lannister, extended a personal invitation to host an art exhibit for local youth at her gallery, praising Eloise's visionary spirit. Morgan's business also found unexpected supporters. Some of the same investors who had withdrawn returned with apologies, admitting they'd been misled by hearsay. Morgan, loyal to those who stood by him in the tough times, politely declined their renewed overtures. He preferred forging alliances with ethical partners who believed in transparency rather than petty vendettas. Meanwhile, Eloise's cousin, Maggie Harrington, openly sided with her. She visited the Stanford mansion often, assisting Eloise in planning events for the foundation. Maggie revealed that many in the extended Harrington clan quietly admired Eloise's bold stand, but they were too afraid of Lady Rosamond to speak up. One crisp afternoon, Eloise and Maggie convened a small meeting to finalize details for the upcoming Art for Hope event, designed to raise funds for mental health resources. Morgan popped in to see if they needed anything. Eloise smiled, radiant with a sense of purpose. "We're just finalizing the budget. Thank you for letting us use the estate grounds for the exhibition." Morgan leaned over the table, scanning the plans. "My pleasure. It'll be a grand day." Maggie gave him a playful nudge. "You two are quite the power couple now, aren't you?" Eloise flushed slightly. Morgan laughed, placing a hand on Eloise's shoulder. "We're figuring things out as we go. But yes, I think we make a decent team." They exchanged a tender glance. In that moment, the ghosts of arranged marriage and hidden faces felt worlds away. They weren't just fulfilling an old contract. They were building a partnership grounded in genuine respect and shared dreams. While Eloise's star rose in Redwood Hills, Lady Rosamond tightened her grip on the Harrington manor. She cut off family members who dared associate with Eloise, fueling resentment among her own kin. Rumors of infighting leaked out. Some believed Rosamond was too harsh, jeopardizing the Harrington legacy with her vendetta. Others sided with her, decrying Eloise's defiance as a break with tradition. Morgan saw the toll it took on his wife. Though she rarely spoke of it, he knew she missed aspects of her old life, certain relatives who had once been kind, the familiar corridors of Harrington Manor, perhaps even the affection of her grandmother. Despite Rosamond's cruelty, Eloise had lived under her guardianship for years. One evening, Eloise found a letter slipped under the door of the mansion. The stationery bore the Harrington crest. Inside, in elegant but sharp handwriting, were words that threatened to unearth old wounds. Eloise, there is more to your parents' story than you know. Comply with my request to sign over your inheritance, or I will reveal every sordid detail. You may think your new philanthropic image is above reproach, but trust me, secrets can shatter illusions. Rosamond Eloise trembled, clutching the note. Morgan read it, anger roiling. She's threatening to use your parents' tragedy against you. We can't let her get away with this. Eloise's voice shook. How does she plan to spin it? She was the one who covered it up. Perhaps there's something else I don't know. Morgan steeled himself. Then we'll find out. We'll expose her manipulations if we must. Eloise bit her lip. This isn't just about scandal. It's personal. My parents. I can't bear the thought of them being dragged through the mud. Morgan embraced her. We'll do this carefully. But we won't be bullied. Deep down, Eloise feared that Rosamond might have evidence to implicate her father in illegal dealings or reveal painful truths behind the suicides. The weight of that possibility cast a long shadow, threatening to unravel the fragile peace they had built. Determined to uncover the truth, Morgan enlisted Jonathan Thorne's help. Jonathan was well connected, with contacts in law enforcement and private investigation. He arranged for a discreet detective, Harriet Green, to look into the Harrington family files. Harriet was known for her quiet tenacity, specializing in digging up skeletons in private archives without leaving a trace. Weeks passed, during which Morgan and Eloise continued their public philanthropic efforts while bracing for Rosamond's next move. Harriet finally returned with a folder marked confidential. She met Morgan in a discreet cafe, glancing around warily before sliding the folder across the table. It wasn't easy, but I uncovered some old documents, Harriet whispered. Morgan opened the folder. Inside were financial statements, letters, and a copy of a police report from years prior. Skimming through, Morgan's eyes widened. The Harrington finances had plummeted after risky investments, leaving Eloise's father, Desmond Harrington, teetering on bankruptcy. Desperate to salvage the family name, Desmond had taken illicit loans from dubious sources. When those lenders threatened violence, he fell into despair. A letter from Desmond to Rosamond surfaced, begging for help. He wrote, "Mother, you must save Eloise from this ruin. I fear I cannot continue living under this debt." Morgan's throat constricted. Here was confirmation of the father's despair. Another report suggested Rosamond discovered Desmond's body and meticulously orchestrated a cover-up. A detective's note indicated large sums of money were paid to hush the affair. Morgan realized Rosamond was complicit in both burying the truth and fueling her own image as the unassailable matriarch. He returned home, folder in hand, to share the findings with Eloise. Her face turned ashen, tears slipping silently as she read her father's anguished words. "So, this is it," she whispered. He was trapped by debt and the family's expectations. Grandmother cared more about reputation than saving him. Morgan reached out to steady her. "This also means she can't truly blackmail you with anything. She's the one who orchestrated the lies." Eloise nodded, trembling. "Yes, but if she goes public with the details, it could overshadow our foundation's work. People love a scandal. My father's memory might become tabloid fodder." Morgan held her gaze. "We can control the narrative by being honest first. We tell the truth in a way that honors your father's struggle, raising awareness for mental health and the pressures of maintaining an old family name. We don't let her wield this as a weapon." Tears shone in Eloise's eyes. "You'd do that for me?" He squeezed her hand. "I married you for better or worse, Eloise. I'd do anything to protect you and to see you freed from her threats." The couple agreed that a public statement was the best defense against Rosamond's impending smear campaign. They organized a press conference at Redwood Hills Historic Civic Hall, inviting reputable journalists and philanthropic partners rather than tabloid reporters. The goal: to share the truth about Eloise's parents and underscore the urgent cause of mental health awareness. When the day came, the hall buzzed with curiosity. Morgan opened with a concise address, explaining the heartbreak of family secrets and the importance of breaking stigma. Then he stepped aside for Eloise. She stood before the microphone, nerves evident, but her voice unwavering. "My father, Desmond Harrington, suffered a severe financial crisis and mental anguish," she began, her eyes scanning the assembled crowd. Pressures to uphold a storied family name contributed to his despair. "My mother, unable to cope with the tragedy, also passed soon after. These events were concealed to maintain appearances, but I believe it's time to shed light on reality, to honor my parents with honesty, not shame." She paused, the cameras clicking. Morgan watched from the side, admiration surging. "This is not a spectacle," she continued. "I hope to spark a dialogue about how families of all backgrounds can face mental health challenges. Our new foundation is dedicated to providing resources and removing stigma. We don't want any child to feel they have to hide behind a veil of secrecy." Tears glistened in the eyes of several journalists. A wave of empathy seemed to ripple through the hall. As Eloise concluded, the applause wasn't the polite clapping typical of press events. It was heartfelt, resonant. In the aftermath, social media lit up with messages of support. Public opinion shifted even more firmly in Eloise's favor. Far from tarnishing the Harrington name, her courage in telling the story elevated her status as a compassionate figure who understood the darkest depths of grief and anxiety. Lady Rosamond's rumored attempt to release her own version of the scandal fizzled. Any statement she might have made would seem petty or vindictive in the face of Eloise's transparent compassion. Following the press conference, Eloise was inundated with letters of gratitude from strangers who related to the story, individuals who had battled depression or lost loved ones. She spent hours writing back, deeply moved by the personal accounts. Morgan, witnessing her empathy, felt his love deepen into something profound. Meanwhile, the Harrington Stanford initiative grew in prominence. Donations poured in from supporters who admired Eloise's authenticity. Even Redwood Hills' mayor reached out, proposing a collaboration to expand mental health programs citywide. Back at the Stanford mansion, Elizabeth's condition showed marginal improvement. She praised her daughter-in-law's bravery, encouraging Eloise to keep shining a light on societal taboos. The once quiet halls of the mansion, filled with renewed energy, staff buzzed about the upcoming Art for Hope event. Extended family visited more often, drawn by Eloise's positive influence. The estate felt alive in a way Morgan hadn't experienced since childhood. One afternoon, Morgan found Eloise taking a reflective walk through the rose garden. He joined her silently, slipping his hand into hers. They strolled amidst blooming petals, the sun warm on their faces. Finally, he spoke. "What you did telling your parents' story was extraordinary. You turned pain into a cause that's helping so many." She squeezed his hand. "I couldn't have done it alone. You stood by me, believing in me. I'm not sure when it happened, but I trust you in a way I've never trusted anyone." His heart pounded with a sudden rush of emotion. "Eloise, we started off on the wrong foot, forced by tradition. But now I can't imagine my life without you." She stopped, turning to face him. Her eyes sparkled, reflecting both vulnerability and warmth. "Morgan, I feel the same. I was so afraid when we first met, but you showed me there's more to marriage than empty formalities." They leaned closer, the garden's fragrance enveloping them. This time, the kiss they shared was neither tentative nor obligatory. It was a promise of a future built on mutual respect, affection, and genuine partnership. The veil that once separated them was gone, replaced by clear devotion. Despite the momentum in Eloise's favor, Lady Rosamond did not quietly fade away. Some weeks after the press conference, the matriarch requested a meeting at Harrington Manor. Eloise hesitated but agreed, hoping they might find a path toward reconciliation. Morgan insisted on accompanying her. They arrived in the late afternoon, stepping into the manor's dimly lit foyer. Rosamond awaited them in a grand sitting room, the curtains drawn. She sat upright in a carved mahogany chair, radiating disapproval. Without preamble, she said, "You've humiliated our family with your public confessions." Morgan bristled. "We exposed the truth." "That's not humiliation, it's integrity." Rosamond's eyes flashed. "Integrity? You tarnished the Harrington name, laid bare personal tragedy. Our family thrived on discretion. Your father's mistakes should have been buried. Now, rumors swirl about suicides and debts. Investors are wary of dealing with me." Eloise inhaled, steadying herself. "I've found a better path. Our foundation, our honesty, it's resonating with people, bringing hope. You don't have to join us, but you can't drag me back into darkness." Rosamond sneered. "You speak like a child. My resources may be diminished, but I still carry influence. My allies are loyal to me, not you." Morgan stepped forward. "We're not here to threaten you, Lady Rosamond. We only want closure. Eloise deserves her inheritance without strings, and if you truly care about the Harrington legacy, you'll see that her philanthropic work is beneficial, not destructive." Rosamond's gaze settled on Eloise, softer for a moment. "I cared for you all your life. Your parents left you in my care. Now you repay me by discarding centuries of tradition for this man and his modern ideals." Eloise's voice quivered. "You used me to uphold illusions. I love you for raising me, but I can't live in your shadow. I won't hide my face or my truths any longer." A tense silence followed. Finally, Rosamond rose, turning her back. "Then you leave me no choice. Go, and do not expect my blessing." Eloise's eyes burned with tears, but she stood firm. Morgan placed a comforting hand on her shoulder, guiding her out. They walked away, the echo of Rosamond's words lingering like a final, bitter farewell. Time marched on. The Art for Hope event arrived, a grand exhibition on the Stanford Mansion's lawns, showcasing paintings, sculptures, and performances by young talents from diverse backgrounds. All proceeds went toward mental health outreach programs. It was a sunlit, joyous day. The estate thronged with visitors. Journalists from respected publications mingled with artists, donors, and local families, celebrating creativity and compassion. Eloise took center stage for the opening remarks, dressed in a simple yet elegant gown. Her hair pinned back with a subtle ribbon, she radiated confidence, greeting each artist personally. In her speech, she spoke of art's ability to heal, bridging gaps between communities and fostering empathy. Morgan watched from the side, heart swelling with admiration. He recalled the man he'd been before their wedding, a cynic who believed he was marrying an ugly, sheltered heiress. How wrong he'd been. Instead, he'd gained an extraordinary partner who had transformed his life in ways he never anticipated. Their marriage was no mere contract now. It was a testament to growth, mutual respect, and the power of shared dreams. Throughout the day, guests congratulated them both, praising their philanthropic alliance. Some recalled the swirling rumors that had once plagued Eloise's name. Now, no one mentioned anything but her passion and kindness. The veil was long forgotten. Amid the festivities, Maggie Harrington arrived, hugging Eloise and congratulating her cousin. Maggie confided that even some Harrington relatives quietly admired the couple's stance. "They might not say it openly, but they're proud of you," she whispered, placing a hand over Eloise's. "They see you shining in your own right." Eloise blinked back tears, smiling. "Thank you, Maggie. That means more than they know." Days turned into weeks, and Eloise's philanthropic star continued to rise. Meanwhile, Lady Rosamond receded from public engagements. Rumours swirled that she was grappling with internal family disputes and dwindling finances. Despite her grandmother's harsh parting words, Eloise wrestled with guilt. After all, Rosamond had provided shelter and education, even if it came with manipulative strings. Late one evening, a messenger delivered a package to the Stanford mansion. Inside was a single diamond pendant, the Harrington family heirloom that had belonged to Eloise's mother. Accompanying it was a terse note: "No one else is worthy of this. Keep it safe." There was no signature, but the handwriting was unmistakably Rosamond's. Eloise stared at the pendant, tears blurring her vision. Morgan placed a comforting arm around her. "It seems like a subtle olive branch." She held the pendant close. "It's her way of saying she won't fight us anymore, but she can't openly concede. I do wish things could be different between us." Morgan pressed a gentle kiss to her temple. "Maybe, in time, your grandmother will come around. For now, at least you have this piece of your mother back." They placed the pendant in a safe spot, a tangible symbol of Eloise's reclaimed heritage. Though fully reconciled with Rosamond might be a distant dream, this token offered a spark of hope that perhaps, someday, their bond could mend. As seasons changed, the legacy of the veiled bride transformed into a narrative of empowerment. Eloise and Morgan continued expanding their foundation's reach, forging connections that enabled them to help countless individuals. Their union, once ridiculed as a relic of archaic tradition, evolved into a partnership that seamlessly blended modern values and inherited responsibilities. Elizabeth Stanford found renewed joy in her final months, witnessing her son's genuine happiness and admiring Eloise's accomplishments. She passed away peacefully one quiet morning, leaving behind words of blessing for their life ahead. Eloise often reflected on how she and Morgan had started, two strangers bound by a contract, each burdened by flawed assumptions and rigid family dictates. Yet that fateful wedding unveiled more than her face. It revealed compassion, courage, and the possibility of forging one's destiny. No, life was not perfect. Family scars remained, and challenges awaited. But each hurdle they overcame together solidified a simple truth. True love isn't about first impressions, but about evolving into the best versions of ourselves when tested by adversity. Hand in hand, they stood on the threshold of their future confident, not because tradition decreed it, but because they had chosen each other freely and discovered that beneath any veil lies the strength of a heart willing to hope, heal, and stand in the light. From a forced union born of ancient family obligations to a deeply fulfilling partnership, Morgan and Eloise's journey shows that true love often emerges when least expected. In shedding preconceived notions and confronting oppressive traditions, they discovered how honesty, empathy, and mutual support could bind two souls more powerfully than any contract. Though rumors and secrets once overshadowed their relationship, they turned personal struggles into a force for good, championing mental health awareness and advocating for transparency in a world that often values appearances over truth. If their story moved you, please take a moment to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel for more tales that highlight resilience and hope. Your engagement helps us continue bringing you real-life drama fiction that inspires and uplifts. Together, Let's spread the transformative power of love and compassion, one story at a time.